My whole body froze the second I heard the words. "You don't belong here anymore." It was my father's voice. Cold, final, like he was reading a sentence carved in stone. Before I go on, make sure you're subscribed, drop a like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. This is a story you won't forget. I was standing on the porch of the house I had helped build with my own hands. Every brick, every beam, every drop of sweat I'd poured into it carried my fingerprints. But now, instead of pride, I felt like an intruder. The door was wide open, laughter spilled out, and there they were. My father, his new wife, and her 2 teenage sons, sprawled across the living room like they'd lived there all their lives. My father's arm rested across the back of the couch, a gesture that used to mean safety and warmth when I was a child. But now it wrapped around someone else's family, not me. I tried to step inside, carrying the box of groceries I had brought, just like I'd done every weekend since Mom died. But his new wife, Diane, gave me that little smirk, the kind people wear when they know they've already won. "Richard," she said smoothly, "we weren't expecting you." Her boys chuckled under their breath, not even bothering to hide it. "I live here," I said, voice low, steady, but my heart hammered like it wanted out of my chest. "I grew up here. I paid for half the renovations. What do you mean you weren't expecting me?" My father stood up. He didn't even look guilty, didn't hesitate. "This is our home now. Things change. You need to let go and move on." I looked at him, at the man who had once been my hero, the man who taught me how to hold a hammer, how to dig the foundation for the workshop out back, the man who used to tell me I'd carry the family name forward. And now, he couldn't even meet my eyes. "You replace me," I whispered. Not loud enough for the others to hear, but loud enough for him to flinch. He shook his head like I was being dramatic. "I didn't replace you. I have a new family now. You'll understand one day." Understand? What exactly was I supposed to understand? That my mother's death had left a vacancy? That her memory could be wiped away and filled with someone else's smile, someone else's children, while I was pushed out like trash? I dropped the grocery box on the floor. Apples rolled across the hardwood, knocking against the baseboard. Diane laughed softly, almost musically, but it was poison to my ears. One of her sons picked up an apple and took a bite out of it without asking, without even looking at me. Like this was his house, not mine. I wanted to scream, to grab my father by the shoulders and demand he tell me why. Why he threw me aside. Why everything Mom and I had built together, every memory, every sacrifice, was suddenly meaningless. But I didn't. I just stood there, staring at the family that wasn't mine, in the house that was no longer mine, with the father who had stopped being my father the moment he uttered those words. "You should go," Diane said finally, her voice soft, fake sweet. "It's awkward for everyone when you come around like this. Richard and I need to focus on our family now. Our family. Not his family. Not my family. Their family." The air in my lungs turned to ice. I bent down slowly, picked up one of the apples, and placed it back in the box. My hands shook, but not from fear. From something sharper, something colder, something I hadn't felt in years. I looked directly at my father. "Do you really want me gone?" He didn't even hesitate. "Yes, it's better this way." That was it. The final nail in the coffin of everything we'd been. I picked up the box again and turned toward the door. My father didn't follow. Diane didn't apologize. Her sons snickered. And I walked out into the night, the sound of their laughter echoing in my skull like nails on glass. I didn't cry. Not one tear. Because in that moment, I knew something with absolute clarity. They thought they could erase me. They thought they could take everything I had built and hand it to someone else. But they were wrong. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to plead for scraps of attention from the man who should have defended me, not discarded me. Number I was going to take back everything that was mine. And when I did, they would never forget the day they told me I didn't belong. The night air cut into me as I walked down the steps, the grocery box heavy in my arms. But it wasn't the weight of apples and bread that bent my shoulders. It was the weight of knowing I'd just been erased. I drove without really seeing the road, headlights slicing through darkness, my mind stuck between past and present. Every corner of that house carried the ghost of my mother. And now, every ghost had been evicted, painted over with new curtains, new laughter, new faces. When I finally pulled into my apartment, I didn't even bother turning on the lights. I set the box on the counter, sat in the silence, and let my thoughts tear me open. I remembered the way Mom's hands looked when they were stained with varnish. She wasn't afraid of work. She was right there beside me when we sanded down the staircase. Dad used to joke that we were his crew. My right and left hands, he called us. We built more than a house back then. We built a life. The first summer after graduation, I spent every weekend helping Dad extend the deck. We worked from dawn until the sun dipped into the trees, sweat burning our eyes. But when we looked at the finished railing, polished and solid, we knew it was ours. Ours, not Diane's, not her kids. Ours. Mom used to bring us lemonade in those cheap plastic cups. She'd sit on the steps, watching us argue over measurements, smiling in that way that meant she was proud, even when she teased us for being stubborn men. 2 bulls with hammers, she'd laugh. I'd give anything to hear that again. But Mom was gone. Cancer didn't care about her smile or her strength. It came, it took, and it left me and Dad staring at each other across a hospital bed, promising we'd take care of each other. I clung to that promise for years, and now he'd traded me away. For Diane. For her picture-perfect smiles and her spoiled sons who never lifted a hammer in their lives. The more I thought about it, the colder my chest became. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. He didn't just replace me. He handed over everything I built. Every nail, every board, every drop of sweat I'd poured into that house. I stood up restless. The apartment walls felt too tight. My reflection in the window looked older, harder than I remembered. I whispered to myself, no more. I thought back over the last few years. The business contracts I'd handled when Dad was too tired. The nights I stayed up reworking blueprints, saving deals from collapsing. The bank account I'd fed with my own paychecks to keep things afloat when expenses ran high. Those weren't just family contributions. Those were investments. Mine. And suddenly, it clicked. He might have replaced me at the dinner table, but legally, practically, financially, I was still inside the very bones of that house and business. He couldn't erase that with a sentence. I grabbed the worn binder from my desk drawer. It still smelled faintly of sawdust and printer ink. Inside were copies of contracts, invoices, receipts, proof of everything I'd contributed. Some people kept photo albums of vacations. I kept paper trails of sacrifices. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. Not from fear this time, but from a strange kind of calm that only comes when pain hardens into resolve. Dad thought I'd walk away quietly, nursing my wounds. Diane probably thought I'd fade into the background, too ashamed to fight. But they underestimated me. Mom used to tell me, strength doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers. Tonight, it was whispering, steady and sharp. take it back, all of it. I closed the binder and leaned back in my chair. The apartment hummed with the sound of the fridge, the clock ticking on the wall, the city outside moving like nothing had changed. But inside me, everything had. This wasn't going to be a screaming match or a petty argument in the living room. I wasn't going to stoop to their level. If my father wanted to choose Diane and her sons, let him. But when the dust settled, they would be left with nothing they could steal from me. I pictured Mom's face again, soft and tired in those last hospital weeks. "Promise me you'll keep what we built alive," she'd whispered. I thought I'd kept that promise by staying loyal to Dad. I was wrong. Keeping what we built alive didn't mean protecting him. It meant protecting the legacy, protecting us. And now, for the first time since she died, I knew exactly how to do it. I didn't wait long. The longer I sat in that apartment, the more I felt the walls close in. I needed answers. Not from Diane, not from her smirking sons. No, from him. The next evening, I drove back to the house. But this time, I didn't bring groceries. Didn't come smiling like a son trying to be welcome. I came empty-handed, because I wasn't coming to give. The driveway was lit, Diane's car out front. The sound of a television filtered through the windows. I knocked once, firmly. My father opened the door. "Can we talk?" I asked. He hesitated, then stepped outside, closing the door behind him like I was a salesman who shouldn't dirty the rug. We stood under the porch light, moths circling above us, the night pressing close. "You shouldn't keep coming here," he said. His tone wasn't angry, just dismissive, like I was a problem he needed to manage. I stared at him, my jaw tight. "You mean to the house I helped build? To the business I practically ran while you were drowning in grief?" He didn't flinch. "Don't turn this into a ledger. Family isn't about who paid what or who built what. Things change. I have a new life now." My chest burned. A new life? What about our life? What about Mom? Everything she built with us, you're just throwing it away? His eyes flickered, but only for a second. "Your mother's gone. You need to accept that." I have. Diane makes me happy. Her boys, they give me something to look forward to. The words hit harder than any punch. Her boys, not me. Not the son who had carried his grief like it was his own. Not the son who had stepped in when he couldn't face paperwork, who had poured money into repairs just to keep things running. Do you even hear yourself? My voice shook with fury. "You didn't just move on, Dad. You replaced me. Like I was some broken tool you could toss aside when something shinier came along." He crossed his arms. "You're being dramatic. I didn't replace you. But you need to understand. You're grown now. You have your own life to build. I don't owe you space in mine." I laughed. Bitter, sharp, ugly. "Don't owe me. You don't owe me after I gave everything. After Mom begged me to keep this family together." His face hardened. "Don't bring your mother into this. She wouldn't want you clinging to the past." The words sliced through me, using her memory, her voice, as a weapon against me. That was the moment something broke for good. I stepped closer, my voice low, steady, colder than I'd ever heard myself speak. "You made your choice, Dad. You picked them. Fine. But don't think for a second I'm just going to disappear. I built too much of this life for you to give it away like it means nothing." He shook his head, almost pitying. "You don't understand, son. Sometimes, letting go is the only way forward." I held his gaze until the silence thickened. "Then you let go of the wrong person." His jaw clenched. For a moment I thought he might lash out, raise his voice, argue back. But he didn't. He just turned, opened the door, and went back inside. The sound of laughter greeted him. Diane's laughter, her boys' voices, and the door shut in my face. I stood there, staring at the wood grain of that door, feeling the cold bite into my skin. For years, I had been patient. For years, I had believed loyalty would mean something. But now I understood. I wasn't his son anymore, not in his eyes. But he was still my father. And I knew exactly how to hurt him in ways Diane and her boys never could. Not with screams, not with fists, with silence, with precision, with control. I walked back to my car, the porch light burning against my back like judgment. By the time I turned the ignition, I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was calm. And calm is the most dangerous thing I've ever been. The next morning, I woke before dawn. No alarm, no restless tossing. My eyes just opened, and I was fully awake. That never used to happen, not before everything collapsed. But now, the emptiness inside me had been replaced with something far more solid. Intent. I brewed coffee and cleared my desk, pushing aside the half-finished projects and unopened mail. Then I pulled out the old binder again. It sat heavy on the wood, the kind of weight that wasn't about paper, but about history. Page after page, I flipped through invoices, receipts, contracts. The house wasn't just my father's, it was ours. My name was on payments, my signature on permits, my money poured into repairs when he didn't have enough. I had bank transfers to prove it. The business, that was even better. My fingerprints were everywhere. I had handled supplier negotiations, signed for deliveries, even filed tax extensions. Half the growth in the last 5 years had come from contracts I'd secured. Some were in my name outright. I leaned back, sipping the bitter coffee, letting the realization sink in. My father thought he'd cut me out, but he couldn't. Not really. The foundation of his new life was still resting on my shoulders. And if I moved just right, the whole thing could crumble. That thought didn't bring me joy. It wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about balance. Justice. He had replaced me like I was disposable. Fine. But I wasn't disposable. Not legally, not financially, not in reality. I opened my laptop and began making calls. Not to friends, not to family. Those bridges were already gone. To accountants, contractors, and the bank manager who'd known me since I was 20. Every polite conversation was another brick sliding out of the wall my father thought was so solid. The first discovery came quickly. The workshop out back, the one Dad liked to brag about building with his own 2 hands. The loan paperwork was in my name. I had covered the down payment, used my credit score when his was too weak. That building was mine on paper, no matter how many times Diane's kids tried to hang their bikes inside. Then the bigger one. 2 contracts tied to the family business had renewal clauses. Clauses I had signed. Without my signature, they'd lapse in less than 6 months. If they lapsed, the revenue stream would collapse. I traced my finger over the ink of my own name. Power. That was what this was. Silent, undeniable power. By noon, I had filled a yellow notepad with bullet points. Assets, leverage points, expiration dates. Every line was another thread in the net I was weaving. But I wasn't stupid. This wasn't just about paperwork. Diane's greed was obvious, her boys' entitlement louder than any alarm clock. They wouldn't stop pushing until they drained my father dry, and he wouldn't stop feeding them until there was nothing left. Good, let them. Because when people show you what they want most, they also show you how to break them. I closed the binder, slid the notepad into my desk drawer, and looked around my apartment. For the first time since Mom died, I felt something close to clarity. not happiness, not peace. Those were gone. But clarity was enough. I thought of my father's face the night before, the way he said, "You'll understand one day," with that hollow certainty. He thought I'd walk away and leave him to his new life. He was wrong. I whispered into the quiet room, almost as if I were speaking to Mom again. "You built this with me. I'm not letting them take it. I promise, and promises, unlike fathers, weren't something I broke." The first time I saw them lounging in the backyard, it almost made me laugh. Almost. Diane's boys were sprawled across the lawn chairs my mom had picked out, drinking sodas like they owned the view. My father stood nearby, grilling steaks on the barbecue I'd bought him for his birthday. Diane hovered with her glass of white wine, giving orders about how the table should be set. I watched from the street, hidden behind the tinted glass of my truck. It was surreal. Like watching strangers play house in a place that wasn't theirs. In a way, that's exactly what it was. Her boys, Josh and Caleb, were the kind of kids who'd never worked a real day in their lives. Josh bragged about being into crypto, even though everyone knew he lived off Diane's alimony checks. Caleb had already dropped out of community college twice, yet somehow always had the latest sneakers. And now, they were stretching out in the yard I'd mowed 100 times, in the shadow of the workshop I'd paid for, eating food my father bought with money I'd helped earn. The irony was almost too perfect. I didn't confront them that day. I didn't even drive in. I just watched. Because every laugh, every bite, every careless gesture was information. And information is leverage. Over the next few weeks, I let them get comfortable. Diane started inviting her sisters over. Her boys hosted poker nights in the living room. They parked their cars, cheap, flashy things, right where my mother's rose bushes used to grow. And my father? He looked happy. Or maybe just numb. Either way, he didn't stop it. He didn't stop them, that was fine. The higher they climbed, the harder the fall. I started feeding the greed. Subtly, a suggestion here, a hint there. I'd accidentally let it slip that Dad's business had a big payout coming from a contract I'd secured. I'd mentioned to Diane in passing that the workshop might be worth 6 figures if it were sold off separately. It didn't take much. Diane's eyes lit up like slot machines every time she heard the word value. Her boys followed her lead. Soon they were whispering in my father's ear, urging him to expand, to sell, to cash in. And he listened. Of course he did. Because that's what he did with me for years, leaned on me for advice, for ideas. Only now, he couldn't tell the difference between genuine support and manipulation. It was almost sad. Almost. One night, I got a call from Caleb. His voice was cocky, careless. "Hey, man. Dad said you know about the contracts. You think it's smart if we refinance the house?" Diane's thinking pool. You know, to make it more comfortable. I stared at the phone, silent for a moment. Then said evenly, "Yeah, maybe. If you think you can handle it." He laughed like I'd just given him permission to burn the place down. I hung up and wrote in my notebook, "They're asking, they're ready." The trap wasn't about pushing them, it was about letting them push themselves. Diane and her sons believed they were taking control. They thought I was just lingering in the background, too bitter or too weak to stop them. But every suggestion, every idea, every yes, maybe I gave them, was another brick they laid on their own downfall. I wasn't just reclaiming what was mine. I was making sure that when it all collapsed, they would be standing in the rubble, not me. And my father? He'd finally see what kind of family he'd chosen over his own blood, It didn't take long for the pressure to start breaking him. By late summer, the house looked different. Not physically, though Diane had swapped out curtains and painted walls like she was erasing every trace of Mom, but in the atmosphere. The laughter that once spilled freely now sounded forced, strained. I saw it in my father's shoulders first, the way they hunched lower each time I stopped by. He didn't even realize I noticed. Diane still smiled for the neighbors, still paraded her boys around like princes. But behind closed doors, the mask was slipping. One evening, I drove past after work. Through the kitchen window, I caught a glimpse. Diane waving her glass, sharp gestures cutting the air, her voice shrill even through the glass. My father sat at the table, head in his hands, nodding like a man too tired to fight. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew the script. More money, more comfort, more. The contracts I'd hinted at weren't paying out fast enough for Diane's taste. The workshop she dreamed of selling was tangled in paperwork she couldn't untangle. And the boys? They were bleeding him dry. Caleb with his investment opportunities, Josh with his constant repairs on a car that cost more than he'd ever earned. And every time they asked, my father gave. It was almost poetic, watching him pour himself out the same way I had for him. But unlike me, Diane and her boys didn't say thank you. They demanded. By September, the first cracks had spread into the business. One supplier called me directly, not my father. He remembered who had closed the last deal, who had negotiated the last shipment. "Richard, look," he said carefully. "Your dad's pushing extensions, but invoices are piling up. If something doesn't give soon, we're pulling." I kept my voice calm. Do what you have to do. He made his choices. The supplier sighed. Shame. Never thought I'd see him run things into the ground. Neither did I. But there it was. A week later, Diane cornered me in the driveway. Her smile was stretched too thin, her voice brittle under the sugar. "You're good with numbers," she said. "Be a dear and help your father sort out these bills, won't you? He's overwhelmed." I looked her dead in the eye. He didn't want me involved anymore, remember? Her lips pressed tight. For the first time, the confidence cracked. She was beginning to understand. I wasn't the weak link. I was the foundation, and she had no idea how to rebuild without me. My father still tried to play the peacekeeper. He called me one night, voice thick with exhaustion. "Son, maybe we can talk. Things are complicated. They're just not used to..." "To what?" I cut in. "Not used to bleeding you dry? Not used to taking everything while you smile and pretend it's fine?" Silence stretched over the line. When he finally spoke, it was a whisper. "It's family. I have to make it work." My hand tightened on the phone. Family. He'd thrown me out for that word. And now it was strangling him. "Good luck," I said flatly, and hung up. Because luck was the only thing he had left. By October, even Diane's boys were restless. Caleb sold his car for half what it was worth, desperate for cash. Josh started working odd jobs he hated. They snapped at each other in public, no longer careful about appearances. And my father, he was shrinking. His once steady presence, the man who taught me to build, to stand tall, to never cut corners. He was a shadow, bent under the weight of his new family. I watched it all unfold with a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. I hadn't lifted a hand against him. Not really. I had only stepped back, let greed run its course. But now the stage was set. One more push and everything would collapse. And when it did, I would be there. Not to catch him, not this time, but to take back what was mine. The breaking point came on a cold November evening. I'd been expecting it. The whispers, the late-night phone calls, the sudden closed-door meetings. Diane and her boys were circling like vultures. And my father, too weary to resist, was letting them guide his hand. That night, I got a call from Josh. His voice was slick with fake confidence, but I could hear the tremor under it. "Hey man, just a heads up. Dad decided we're moving forward with the refinance. The house will be in Diane's name soon. It's just paperwork, you know? No big deal." No big deal. They were erasing me in broad daylight now. I hung up without answering. Then I pulled the binder from my desk and spread everything across the table. Contracts, receipts, deeds. The paper skeleton of the life I'd built, the evidence they had all forgotten, existed. By the weekend, I was ready. I didn't barge in with anger. I walked into the house like I belonged there, because I did. Diane was in the living room with her boys, chattering about furniture catalogs. My father sat off to the side, shoulders slumped, a man watching his own life slip through his fingers. "Richard," Diane said, her tone sharp, "we didn't invite you." I ignored her and dropped the folder onto the coffee table. The heavy thunk cut through the room. Papers spilled like a deck of cards, black and white proof scattered across their polished surface. "What's this?" Caleb sneered. But his smirk faltered when he saw his own mother's name nowhere in the lines of ink. "Documentation," I said flatly. "Proof that this house, that workshop, those contracts you've been salivating over, aren't yours. They're mine. And here's the fun part. Half of them are still tied legally to me, which means any attempt to transfer ownership without my consent." I tapped the stack. "Fraud?" Diane's face drained of color. "That's ridiculous. My father signed nothing without my signature. You know why?" I leaned forward. "Because I was the one who kept this family business alive while he was drowning. My money, my credit, my sweat. You've been living on what I built. And it ends tonight." Josh shifted uneasily. Caleb muttered something under his breath. But it was my father's silence that weighed most. He stared at the papers, his lips parted, eyes darting as though reading them for the first time. "Richard," he whispered finally, voice hoarse, "you kept all this?" "Of course I did," I snapped. "Because unlike you, I don't forget who built what." Diane stood, voice trembling with anger. She tried to dress up as poise. "You can't just barge in here and—" "Yes." I cut her off, my voice steady, cold. "I can. Because this isn't your home. It's not your son's playground. It's not your empire to carve up. You've been playing house in a place that was never yours to begin with." For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Caleb spoke, his tone desperate. "Mom, he's bluffing, right? He has to be." But the truth was staring them in the face. Every signature, every receipt, every contract told the same story. I wasn't gone. I wasn't erased. I was the foundation under their feet. And I just pulled it out. My father looked at me then. Really looked. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. He saw it now, the cost of choosing them over me. He had gambled everything on Diane's family, and the house of cards was collapsing in front of him. Diane finally snapped. "You can't do this." I gathered the papers, sliding them neatly back into the folder. "I already have." And with that, I stood, turned my back on all of them, and walked out. Behind me, the shouting started. Diane's shrill protests, her sons demanding answers, my father's broken attempts to calm them. But none of it mattered. The game was over, and I had won. Winter came early that year. Frost clung to the edges of the workshop windows. The garden lay dead and brittle under the cold. For the first time in months, the house stood quiet. Too quiet. Word spread quickly once I pulled the strings. The contracts lapsed. The workshop legally shifted into my name. The bank halted their refinance when my documents surfaced. The empire Diane thought she'd secured turned to dust overnight. And with it, so did their family. Caleb moved out first, taking whatever he could pawn. Josh followed, leaving behind nothing but broken promises and unpaid bills. Diane lasted 2 more weeks. The neighbors told me she left in the middle of the night, cars stuffed with clothes and boxes, her boys waiting at the curb. She didn't even say goodbye. And my father? He stayed, but not as the man I remembered. When I saw him again, sitting on the porch in the same chair Mom used to read in, he looked smaller, not just older, diminished. He didn't fight me when I showed up with the final paperwork. He didn't beg. He just sat there staring at the empty driveway where Diane's car used to be. "You got what you wanted," he said finally, voice flat. I studied him for a long moment. "Number I got back, what was mine? There's a difference." His eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, I saw regret flicker there. But regret wasn't enough, not after everything. "You chose them," I said quietly. "You replaced me. You thought I'd disappear. You were wrong." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was heavier than any words could be. I turned and walked through the house. The walls felt hollow now, stripped of the warmth Mom had given them. Every room bore scars of Diane's presence. Cheap furniture, gaudy paint, little reminders that nothing gold stays. I stopped in the kitchen, ran my hand across the counter where Mom used to set her lemonade glasses. For a second, I could almost hear her laugh again. Almost. But ghosts don't come back, and neither did families, once they were broken. I left the house that day with the keys in my pocket. Legally, financially, everything was mine again. The workshop, the contracts, the leverage. On paper, I had won. But standing in the cold, watching my father sit alone on that porch, I realized victory didn't feel like I thought it would. Because you can't take back what never returns. You can't rebuild trust with receipts and signatures. You can't resurrect a family once it's been buried by betrayal. I drove away, without looking back. And maybe that was the truest ending. Not revenge, not celebration. Just the simple, bitter fact that sometimes winning costs everything. I had taken back what I built. But in the process, I lost the only thing that ever mattered.